Hi everyone, number one Marmaduke fan here. I just read Kid Gloves by Lucy Knisley. This would be kind of a combination of autobio comic and sort of a Vox-splainer type of comic like the Oatmeal, where it's presenting some little, medical and historical factoids without citations. And when I first picked it up, I kind of knew what I was getting into, but I was sort of charmed and I was sort of primed to really enjoy myself. And I think the importance of this book is I have made videos on this topic before, but Kid Gloves is an illustration of the power of worldview and how the power of worldview can shift the way you look at things in the world in a good way or in a really bad way. So, to be clear, I don't hate Lucy Knisley. I don't think Lucy Knisley is an evil person, but the more I read, the more unhappy and sad I was for her. And there's one page in particular I have to talk about where you can sort of see the worldview collapsing in on itself, and nothing she says makes sense. But it's like watching a tragedy unfold. So don't tweet this at her. Lucy, if you should happen to see this, I read your work very carefully. I thought about your work, and I'm not an anti-SJW channel. I guess that's the point. I started my channel because I come right out of school, and I have been exposed to the progressive lens, the feminist lens for looking at art. And when I was a student, I was studious. I tried to learn how to do that to the best of my ability, and my conclusion was that this is a worldview that contradicts itself. Therefore, it's of very little value. You can try to apply it sometimes, but eventually you're always going to come to the point where the worldview cannot explain something about the world because the worldview itself hasn't thought through what it's even saying or how it can hold all of these contradictory ideas together. And that's the reason I'm saying that is when I get upset, I'm not saying Lucy Knisley is a bad person. I am saying the worldview she is adopting is a bad ideological framework, and we're watching it collapse. So the reason I was kind of predisposed to like this is Lucy kind of comes off as a bit of a choice feminist. So she knows, I'm sure she knows, that when she writes a book about getting married to a man, and when she does a book called Relish My Life in the Kitchen, knowing that the kitchen is a loaded feminist term, she is sort of kind of coyly saying, I am making choices for myself. I love being in the kitchen. I love cooking things. It makes me happy. I love being married. I've learned so much being married. This has been a good change in my life. So she is not a radical feminist. There are radical feminists who will treat marriage as if that's a betrayal of the women's movement. There are radical feminists who will talk about being a homemaker and being a kitchen as if you're some kind of idiot who doesn't have the agency to make choices for yourself. And a woman who recognizes that she's not an automaton, can make these choices. And if being in the kitchen and getting married and having a baby makes you happy, then that's automatically going to set you at odds with the radical feminists. But feminist ideology is broader than sort of the radical academic feminists who sort of devote all of their energies to it. So Lucy is, in this book, not just talking about her experiences of becoming a mother and a lot of the difficulty of trying to become pregnant, miscarriage, the illness of pregnancy. All of that is really interesting because she's just talking about her personal experience. And when you're telling your own story, that matters because it's true. It's your story. But then when she gets into the ideological stuff, that's when it becomes lectury, and that's when things start to fall apart. So let's flip ahead a bit. So now, I want to be clear. When she talks about old sexists in 1800s who misunderstood women's bodies and how pregnancy worked, go for it. It is not wrong to make fun of people who had mistaken beliefs and ideas. But I think the point is that an ideology is something that you use to understand the world around you, meaning that there's never just like a bare fact. There's never just like a little bit of historical data that just exists all by itself. For that historical bit of data or that little factoid to mean anything to you, you have to be able to interpret what it means. My favorite illustration is it's like a jigsaw puzzle. If you don't know what a jigsaw puzzle is or what the picture is for the jigsaw puzzle that you're trying to put together, all a little jigsaw puzzle piece is it's one fact. If you don't know anything about the puzzle, that fact doesn't help you that much. You don't know how to put it together. So worldview is what puts all these facts together. And I think because the feminist worldview has these contradictions. It can correctly identify things. It can look at a sexist and say that was sexist, that was wrong, that hurt women. But then it uses patriarchy as the explanation for everything, and things gradually start to fall apart. So she talks about being a little kid and going to Planned Parenthood to get her sexual education, and she has she praises Planned Parenthood, but she complains that, well, gee, this didn't prepare me for the reality of going through pregnancy. So I'm just guessing here, but the fact that she gives Planned Parenthood a big, kind of like positive mention in her book, and later she talks about pregnant women in such a way that it's pretty clear to me that she's pro-abortion. Again, this is a pattern of Lucy Knisley being a feminist, but talking about her life and her life experiences in a way that kind of puts her at odds with radical feminists. So she'll give a nice shout out to Planned Parenthood, but she will, the entire time she's talking about her baby, present her baby as a human child, as a beautiful human child who she shares this wonderful, warm relationship with. So which is it? I can't quite wrap my mind around the idea that, that's actually how these debates always go. Anytime an abortion debate comes up, the debate is, well, it's not a baby, it's a clump of cells. Well, that doesn't look like a clump of cells. That looks like a baby. That looks like a living human child, and it looks like you share this thing with it. So maybe someone will once you recognize that problem, you have to find some way out of the problem. So one way out of the problem is, well, it's not really a child. Or another way out of the problem is it's all subjective. The mother gets to decide if it's a child or not. If the mother wants her child and she loves her child, then it becomes a person in her mind. If she doesn't want the child and she wants to get rid of the child, then it's no longer a child because its status is subjective. And that just leads to nonsense. So Planned Parenthood gets a mention, and she talks about how, like a lot of types of birth control, actually they have problems. They will make you sick. They will give you, you'll be allergic to them, and you'll have to get surgery. There's no magic pill that makes sex easy and fun and without any consequences whatsoever. All these choices have consequences. Now, the way I can kind of tell she's a normie Democrat, she's not like a radical, lunatic feminist, is things she'll say. So she'll have an acupuncturist, and the acupuncturist will dunk on Western medicine, and that'll kind of annoy her, and she'll stop going to an acupuncturist, right? She knows like there's this weird hippie world where there's a lot of parallels between weird like religious fundamentalists who are suspicious, who constantly have conspiracy theories and want everything to be like natural and are anti-vax. And there's a lot of overlap between that and like the weird hippies who think there's a conspiracy behind everything and they want everything to be natural and anti-vax. There's not just like one religion or one party that has a monopoly on sort of weird conspiracy theory, anti-Western stuff. That there is a significant chunk of the left who have that too. So she's willing to make fun of that. But sort of this is an example of her talking about her political ideas. So her political idea is that the modern medical industry has made incredible leaps in fertility treatments available over the last decade alone. So she talks about all of these expensive treatments, but sadly, insurance and governmental support for reproductive health coverage hasn't evolved to keep pace. So this is her advocating for more government benefits, more taxation to fund more free stuff, right? And the problem with this argument is it always fixates on a good. Wouldn't it be good to help women get pregnant? Yeah, what's it cost? Let's have the government do that. Well, okay, let's think about that. Let's say you're a woman who was in an accident and you lost your uterus. You are never going to be able to take advantage of this government program. Is it fair for a woman who can never be pregnant to pay taxes to support a system to help women who can be pregnant, right? That doesn't seem that fair to me. Is it fair for trans women, right? Is that right? Yeah. Is it fair for I can't even keep the terminology straight, but is it fair for trans women who can't give birth themselves to pay tax? Yeah, any gay couple. Is it fair for any gay couple who can't give birth themselves to pay taxes to support to support cis families getting pregnant? Do you see how there are some like problems here? She generally adopts kind of like the intersectional worldview, but I don't think she's thought through. Eventually, you have to think through these things. It's one thing to just do a comic and say, wouldn't it be nice to pay for this? But then when the rubber meets the road and the tax man comes, then it's going to become an issue and people are going to be at each other's throats over this kind of stuff. Now, it's just a little foreshadowing of like some of the problems. Anytime she talks about politics, she starts sort of getting off the rails into this is where the worldview and the ideology shows up. So she gets pregnant in 2016. She has dreams about Orange Man Bad, and she goes to shop baby clothes. I can honestly say that the gender of my child makes no difference to me. I'm perfectly happy to regard my child as their own little person, unhampered by gender norms, and the sexist baby clothes really bum me out. Ladies love me. Okay, that's a cutesy little joke. It's not saying sexism is good. The joke is that he's a little boy and the girl and the women love him and they give him kisses. So it's a inappropriate thing on the baby. It's supposed to be inappropriate. That's what gives it that's the whole point. It's funny when you do inappropriate things. You're not necessarily endorsing the inappropriate thing. But this discovery coincided with the Oscars. And the winners of everything are a bunch of white guys who've dominated winning forever. Oscars so white. So she is thinking about having her baby, right? And preparing for motherhood. And she's thinking about Orange Man Bad, sexist baby clothes, and Oscars so white. A complete non-controversy. The number one thing that sticks out in her mind is a pretend controversy. This was really important to her. It wasn't important to anyone who has a life beyond the Oscars. And this is where everything falls apart. This is where I have to say, Lucy, you've got to think through these things because this is despicable. I felt responsible to instill in my son the recognition and responsibility of his inherent privilege. If we do something over and over, it becomes normal. If we see the same thing over and over, it becomes normal. We should all be feminists. It was a lot to expect of a 20-week fetus. You already have more societal sway than I do to change the power dynamics of this broken system. That seems premature. All right, this is where it all falls apart. This is terrible. This is evil, what this ideology is doing. She's having her baby, and she's already thinking about how she's going to teach her son about how he's privileged and he bears responsibility for men in the past for things he hasn't done. We should all be feminists. Now, not only is this just evil and cruel and despicable on the surface of it, I'm using hard language here because this needs it. This is also inconsistent with itself. This is not consistent with the progressive worldview. And I know without looking that Lucy has had SJWs read this book and come on her Twitter and call her a trans-exclusive radical feminist. They've called her cis-normative because look at the logic of what she's doing. She goes to the doctor, she gets an ultrasound, she sees that the fetus has a penis, so it's a boy, and then she says, well, I'm not going to raise him according to gender norms. So she is virtue signaling that, hey guys, I'm hip to the problem of gender norms. I'm not going to raise my boy by any of those gender norms. I'm going to raise him in a gender norm-free environment. But she is thinking of her child as a boy and assuming that, therefore, the feminist lens and the intersectional feminist theory of the patriarchy and privilege, all of that applies to her boy. How do you know he's a boy, Lucy, just because he has a penis? Are you hip to how not only is gender a social construct, but the brilliant feminist theory that biological sex is also a social construct? Now, it's an absurd idea. Of course you wouldn't think that naturally. No one going through their normal life would come up with the bright idea that, hey, I don't just think that gender is a social construct, I think biology is a social construct. It's an absurd idea, but it's an absurd idea taught and defended by feminists in the universities. So she's reading sort of general feminist books. There are a couple possibilities. So possibility number one is Lucy is a trans-exclusive radical feminist. She believes that biology is real and trans identity doesn't change biology. If that's true, then when she got lambasted as a trans-exclusive radical feminist, then she deserved it. And good for her, because that is a biological reality. The other possibility is she's a normie feminist. She's a normie Democrat who hates, Orange Man Bad and reads a, feminist book. But she hasn't thought about something really basic, which is that if the logic of the trans movement is true, then nothing she's doing here makes sense. She does not know, if the trans movement is true, she doesn't know that her baby is a boy, because there's no such thing as biological male and female. It's all socially constructed. Or, are those all the possibilities? She is a trans-exclusive radical feminist. She hasn't thought about it, or she's thought about it, and she's just kind of like dismissed it because it seems a little silly. But no matter what, no matter what, there is an inconsistency here, and that inconsistency has to be worked out. And no amount of saying orange man bad and I'm not going to raise my boy to have gender norms is going to protect you from the inescapable logic that if men and women don't exist, then you have no ability to talk about your young boy as a young boy. And you definitely don't have an ability to talk about how he's responsible for the patriarchy because there's no he. Oh, all right. So this came out in 2016. Pal is now about 3 years old, and I don't know. Like, don't at Lucy. Don't tweet at her. Don't contact these people. But what I just hope is that either like the experience of having weird SJWs yell at her because she assumed that boys and girls exist. Hopefully that kind of like cued her to maybe there's more to this than I've thought through. Or maybe like the act of having a child and having a little boy, maybe that can help some young women like get over their weird, creepy gender studies professor and like all the nonsense they filled their head with. But this is terrible. I feel sad for a young boy who is going to be brought up with an attitude that he is morally responsible for men. At the same time, the culture is telling him that being a man isn't a real category, that it doesn't exist. It's a self-contradiction. There's no way to resolve the contradiction unless you take a firm stance and say someone is full of BS. And raising a young boy this way is BS. I'm sorry, Lucy, but it's evil. Now, my hope and prayer is that things worked out and that she's not raising her kid to be little Mr. Woke Soy Boy. But she later will talk about like people giving her unsolicited advice. Why did I mark this? Okay, yeah. So she lumps the Center for Disease Control in with like random parents giving her unsolicited advice. So the Center for Disease Control says, they released a statement advising all women of childbearing age to avoid alcohol, lest one unwittingly harm an unrealized pregnancy. And she visualizes this with a big wagging finger saying, tisk, tisk. Being pregnant and visibly so drove home the realization of how my body was seen as a commodity. Person, vessel. It was a vessel for the much more precious potential life I could bear, controlled by those who thought they knew better. So your way of illustrating this is you write the word person and you point it at the child in the womb. And you're accusing the Center of Disease Control as treating you as a person vessel, as a non-person, because they're advising you not to to drink alcohol when you are of an age to where you might be expecting to be pregnant. You then compare the Center of Disease Control to random people who just are giving you advice or sharing superstitions and don't know anything. Those are not the same thing. That's a category error. When the Center for Disease Control is telling you something, I should hope that there is some research beyond just superstition or anecdotal evidence backing that up. And what's so creepy about this is she actually draws her child as a human person. She draws her child with charity and warmth and love, but then she'll talk about her child as if there's something wrong with talking about the person in the womb as a person, as if somehow by saying this is a person, we're somehow saying that this woman is not a person. And she does it again later. This is just more of the same. So she talks about how there are declining birth rates. And one of the reasons for declining birth rates is birth control and women entering the workforce. The women's movement is effectively a key reason for why there are declining birth rates. And then she says, well, if the government could fund more of this stuff, the number of children born could undoubtedly rise with better societal and governmental support for families. If we just have the government tax more people and invest in some more programs like the Soviets did with their baby-making initiatives, then we can solve the problem of low birth rates. So the problems created by the women's movement and ideological advancement in technology, free sex, free love. What's the solution to the problem created by free sex and free love? More government, more funding. Actually, the part of this I like is societal support for families. Yes, we need cultures to help support young people. We need more than just like isolated individuals who feel like no connection to other people and no connection to their cultures. The church used to provide that for most Americans, and that's something that we've lost. We've become isolated, we've become atomized, we feel like we're alone in a a massive C. But the solution to that is the culture. The solution to that is you, the people, taking responsibility and not demanding that the government step in and do more of it. The government stepping in and doing more of it isn't going to help. And again, infertile people are going to subsidize fertile people. Gay people who can't biologically reproduce, their taxes are going to support cis people who can reproduce. It's just the solution to the problem created by feminism is more feminism and more funding. Is that it? This is another thing. So she talks about the experience of getting an ultrasound, the little history behind it. Sonograms changed obstetrics. They are incredibly popular. It's reassuring to see your baby with your own eyes. But the inaccuracy and murkiness of ultrasounds are also troublesome. They shift attention away from the mother and onto the image of the baby, which perhaps is contributing in part to America's rising maternal mortality rate. Huh? No citation, no explanation of the connection she sees here. But her problem with the ultrasound is by showing you an image of the baby, it shifts people's attention onto the life of the baby, right? Oh, the ultrasound is personifying the fetus. Yet, when she draws her own baby, she draws it as a person. She draws it as a living thing to which she shares a connection with. She doesn't draw it as a clump of cells. And then when she has the baby, she draws it with so much warmth and love. It's beautiful. So Lucy is just a beautiful, normal person. She's going through life. She's learning how to cook. She's getting married. She's having a baby. She's having this wonderful experience. But the ideology is the way that she looks at the world. She looks at facts in the world. She looks at problems in the world. And this becomes confirmation of her ideology. Then when she talks about raising her boy, she talks about how she's going to raise her boy in a woke style to make him aware of his complicity in patriarchy. Your child is not complicit in patriarchy. Your child's an individual. He's responsible for his choices as an individual. You don't even know that he's a boy unless you have a consistent standard by which to say that men and women exist and they're real. A worldview that is sort of naturalistic, materialistic, postmodern, morally subjective, that can't give you a consistent standard for looking at the world. And it all falls apart when you talk about not raising your boy according to gender norms, but I'm going to teach him what a little part of the patriarchy is. That broke my heart. I just pray that reality intervenes. That's the beautiful part of this book, is they talk so much about how the process of having a child changes you, and you learn so much about the world, and you grow up, really. It changes your whole perspective on the world. So my hope for the millennial generation is when some of them finally have kids, this is going to force them to grow up and kind of look past the everybody gets a trophy, postmodern, moral relativistic, live your truth attitude that dominated my education. Actually, I was homeschooled, so I wasn't educated in this environment. But that whole, like, everybody wins a trophy thing is, I think, part of what contributed to millennials' problem. We grow up and our little mini first world problems, that becomes the only thing that we care about. It becomes the only thing we think is important. We latch on to some sort of political ideology to give us purpose, rather than looking at people and churches and our community and God for giving us purpose. So you're in my prayers, Lucy. Let your boy be a boy. That's it. Let boys be boys. I hope that her child, she adopts the worldview of boys will be boys, and that her boy will have a happy childhood free from lecturing about the patriarchy. I'm #1 Marmaduke fan. I got triggered. Don't contact this person. Love you. Catch you later.